Good morning, students. Um, this is your glorious leader, Dr. Henkel. Or I've decided in this time of chaos to be called as glorious leader, or Jim for short. Anyway, I'm going to do short segments on this and then on chapters 24 and 25. And then I'm going to have you answer some questions as a quiz. Then later on in the week, I'll have a larger quiz on the large concepts altogether. So you can listen to a short segment of a lecture, do the quizzes, and then go back and forth that way. They'll all be numbered at the same time. So let's see how we can do with this. I have a cool laser pointer, so yay. Okay, so in chapters 24 and 25, this is basically all I get to talk about for plants because the rest is talked about in 202, Bio 202, because of the photosynthesis qualities. So all I get to talk about is tell you about just the basics of cellular respiration. The plants that we all depend on will do a miraculous thing. They will take carbon dioxide or CO2 into their leaves and produce water and oxygen out of those leaves, and then also use the carbon and light to produce sugars. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but along with water and minerals in the soil, the roots also cause some respiration to go on, but in the opposite way, where sugars are broken down into CO2 while taking up oxygen. This is not as much as it is when they're producing sugars. Now, do not panic. I'm not going to have you tested on this for the most part, but what I basically want you to know is that in plants, they're taking carbon dioxide in by the Calvin cycle and basically sticking one carbon onto a three-carbon chain and putting it together multiple times until you make a sugar, which is a six-carbon ring. And when you stick a number of these sugars together, it's called a starch or a carbohydrate. And some of these leftovers can also be made to amino acids and making fats as well. But for the most part, it is sucrose. The sucrose is made by taking water, splitting it to oxygen, but taking light in photons, and they're transported through. They take some or make some energy that is then used to make these carbons gluing together into sugar. Then on the other side, and here's this six-carbon sugar here, so sucrose in this case, will be broken down into parts. So we're just chopping off carbons here until we get back to this three-carbon form like we had in the Calvin cycle. And we get a little bit of energy being made from there, but then we feed it into the Krebs cycle. And please do not run out of the room screaming wherever you are. Basically the pyruvate here is added in here, and we're adding it into a four-carbon chain to make a six-carbon chain. And after that, the whole purpose of this cycle is to chop off a carbon or a CO2 group and make energy. This goes to the electron transport system to make a lot of ATP. We cut off another carbon, we get CO2 out, and we get more of this charged product that will make more ATP. So we can do this multiple times and keep going around this cycle to make the energy, but it all comes back to adding CO2 or chopping off CO2 for either side of the cycle. And that's the cycle of life, basically. The Calvin cycle, making the sugars, and the Krebs cycle, breaking down those sugars to make energy. That's all you really need to know about that. Now, a lot of people think that this soil that the roots are in are, well, it's icky. And really, it's a fascinating area. And especially if you talk to Dr. Angela Ebling, she talks about soil a lot in her environmental science classes and her environmental science major. But if you look at soil, really look at it, it has minerals, it has something like called humus, which is partially broken down organic material. It has a lot of living creatures in it. We'll talk about that later. But they have different sizes, they have different amounts of water in between them, and different minerals, and this all gives it a different charge sometimes and different pH. But in general, roots have a very fine network of little hairs called rootlets. And this, you guessed it, is just another way to increase surface area. So if we look at soil, really look at it, and you can see water in between these soil particles of clay or what have you. And we see these charged ions of potassium and calcium and hydrogen, also known as protons. Well, the rootlets will take up calcium and take up potassium and take up carbon and take up nitrogen and such. And sometimes they'll actually exchange it for hydrogen. Now, the important thing to remember is in the soil, there is a relatively uniform and relatively low amount of all these ions. And what we're doing as a plant is pumping them into a enclosed space and keep pumping them in. So there's going to be a higher concentration in the rootlet and in the root than in the soil. So it's going to take energy usually to pump them in and make them more concentrated, just like what we were talking about in the kidney. Some of them will pump out an ion to balance out the charge, like calcium is a +2. If we keep pumping in the calcium, all of a sudden it's going to get very negative on the outside and very positive on the inside, and that's an electric charge. I do not want electrified carrots, although it sounds awesome and maybe a band name. Um, the hydrogens are pumped out at the same time to kind of balance out the charge. Now, because of soil requirements, we have a whole list of macro and micronutrients for plants. And some of these are just measuring in the amount that the plants need them, such as carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Those are all organic compounds. Phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, and all these are the macronutrients. I usually think of it as C. Hopkins, like the John Hopkins University cafe mug, except Fe is micro. Okay, so these macronutrients are shown on the side, major component of organic molecules. Nitrogen, we need it to make nucleic acids, so for DNA, chlorophyll, coenzymes, a whole bunch of stuff. And then for the micronutrients are those like iron, boron, manganese, copper, zinc, chloride, and molybdenum, where they are needed in smaller amounts for certain parts of reactions or chlorophyll or photosynthesis, nucleic acid again for synthesis, things like that. This is a YouTube video which might put you to sleep faster than mine lectures will. But please remember that there's micronutrients, I'm underlining the wrong one, and macronutrients that you will need in the soil.